asked Dr. Hoodboy this, and I'm going to ask you this as well. What is the morality of a state that refuses to feed its people, but continues to feed nuclear facilities and nuclear weapons? What is the morality of that society? Thank you so much, Mr. Shah, for joining us. Ladies and gentlemen, today we have somebody very special who has become pretty renowned, not only just in Pakistan, but in the diaspora as well. Muzammil Shah, thank you so much. Welcome to the program.
Thanks a lot. Thank you for having me.
No, thank you for making the time. Let me just get straight into it. First of all, a lot of people that I know always want to know, sometimes in your background, you have a bunch of pictures.
Yeah.
Just a little bit about that, please. Who do you have in the background normally?
Well, actually, it was a gift by a friend, so I just opted to, make it a wall hanging. And there is that big photograph of Nietzsche, who's my favorite philosopher. He was from Germany, an existentialist, and somebody who had a profound impact on my thought as well. Apart from him, there is a picture of Mr. Parvez Woodboy, who is a physicist in Pakistan and a renowned writer as well, a social critic as well. And then I guess there is Yuval Noah Harari and Neil deGrasse Tyson and 3-4 other frames as well. But it doesn't mean that I fully endorse all these people. It's just, the acknowledgement of their work. And I think it's a good background to have. So it's not very, it's not very meaningful in terms of whatever they have done. But it's just an aesthetic sort of a remark.
Well, I interviewed Dr. Hoodboy prior to you, and I think you and Dr. Hoodboy, even though you come from different fields, obviously have the same level of enthusiasm and conviction when you talk about Pakistani politics and the future of it. I think that has come across pretty clearly to a lot of people. So I wanted to ask you, although I do want to point out one of my heroes, Christopher Hitchens. I think you have his picture too in the background.
Yeah, the name, my bad. Yeah, his picture is there.
Let's not forget the good old Hitch. Let's not do that.
Yeah. The Hitch slaps, yeah.
Yeah. Do you consider yourself philosophically an existentialist, do you think?
Well, I think I'm more inclined to that. The reason is because I've digged more into that particular frame of the Western political thinking. So obviously I'm not I haven't been inclined towards that socialist path, which most of the Pakistani intellectuals at least are inclined to. So this is the difference, that I got more attracted to somebody like Nietzsche or Kierkegaard or maybe Heidegger. So these people have inspired me to think beyond my biases and the prejudices that I have as far as the society is concerned. So I will call myself an existentialist here.
Because I know, and I have, obviously listened to your other interviews, and I know you don't call yourself a leftist, or at least not in a classical sense. And also, I think you have a pretty harsh critique of postmodernism, if I'm not mistaken. I actually attended lectures with Professor Darda. Let me try to at least paraphrase what you said, and I want you to comment on it. Maybe I misunderstood you. Host was asking you about your position on why populism has gained in the last, decade or so, and you sort of blame postmodernism for it. Can you get into it a little bit with me?
Well, basically, the criticism that I tend to have on postmodernism is, the negation of that scientific truth. And the other thing that I find very problematic is, that oppressive mentality that everybody who has lost a particular battle is basically an oppressor, and we have to sympathize with them. So when Marxism, basically the classical Marxist sense, after the Bolshevik Revolution and what happened in China, so when they realized that the atrocities which were committed there were too much to defend, So they, just entered into a cloak of postmodernism, basically. And there's a very brilliant book by Professor Stephen Hicks. The name is Explaining Postmodernism. So it's a very great critique on this entire theoretical framework. But where I find it problematic is that oppressor-oppressed duality that it has created. And I don't think that's the way to reach the conclusion in any matter. But the other problem is that the negation of scientific truth, maybe, or of scientific rationality, or of demonizing reason. By doing this, postmodernism has started something which brought the entire human development to square one again. Because the only reason that the European Renaissance kind of contributed to the development in the Western Hemisphere was the prevalence of the scientific rationalism. But when something is attacking that with full force again, the same force that at some point in time the theological forces were using. So that means that the entire distinction of the Western society, it falls on the ground. So what I think is that this entire French postmodernist movement is basically something which I can't agree with, though Nietzsche is somebody who has inspired the entire school, because he could be called the godfather of postmodernism, because he was the one who contested the idea of truth. Prior to him, it wasn't that contested. So even Foucault, somebody like Foucault, drew inspiration from Nietzsche in that regard. So obviously, he has inspired a lot of postmodernist thinkers as well. But the problem
If I may interrupt, Muzammil, I was going to ask you, sorry. So you're basically, your main critique is moving from objectivity to subjectivity. You're basically saying that, and I heard you say in another interview that when all opinions are equally valued, that becomes a problem, right? So you're talking about, I just want to understand you correctly, that because they're saying that, subjectivity is extremely important, and Nietzsche being obviously beyond good and evil and that kind of perspective where there's no, objective morality. But what I really want to understand is, do you believe, because populism, whether it's Trump, whether it's, in Brazil, whether it's in Italy now, whether it's Imran Khan or whatever, it's not new. And there's a trend that goes into people viscerally where they can, let me just ask you the question. Do you believe that somebody like Imran Khan, let's say, who reduces bigger ideas to small statements and tries to sell it? I mean, Bhutto did the same thing, right? So it's nothing new, right? So I don't even know Imran Khan understands postmodernism, right? Or so what do you make of somebody like him then?
Well, basically, he's somebody who has, offered that simplified solution of every complex problem. So the problem that I, kind of tried to explain with my criticism on postmodernism, I didn't blame the entire populist movement on the postmodern tradition. But what I tend to say is that when all opinions are devoid of quality, but still we have to respect them because we don't have to hurt somebody. And there is this emotional hemophilia flowing, just as Bill Maher says, that whenever you start making an argument and it hurts somebody, then they come up with the argument that I'm hurt. That's why you can't proceed with this. So that emotional vulnerability and basing it on the age of colonialism in the past and, just inflicting guilt on people just because their forefathers did something wrong. So this entire frame of mind has kind of fueled that idea.
Okay, so let's get in. Let's dig a little deeper into that. But aren't we talking about, let's say, what happened in South Africa? Okay, the Truth and Reconciliation, right?
Yeah.
Where apartheid fell or apartheid was dismantled. In Germany, they're highly really focused dismantling of their Nazi past and making sure they never forget it, right? A lot of people actually say that maybe if Pakistan and India did the same thing with the pain that they went through in the partition, that would be helpful. But would you consider that blaming our ancestors or their ancestors in what happened? Isn't that necessary to get beyond the hurt of the historical pain and suffering?
I think if we start blaming the entire destruction of this society that I am living in on the colonial age, then we don't have any motivation to go beyond this because we are still stuck in the past.
I'm not talking about colonialism. I'm talking about what we did to each other. I'm talking about what happened in the partition. Millions of people died. British didn't
Yeah.
do that. British
Well,
caused the partition maybe, but we killed each other, right?
yeah.
The point I'm trying to make is, and you brought up Bill Maher, and I have I used to be a huge fan. And again, he has evolved over time, as you know. He was kicked out of ABC because he said that the people who flew their planes into the towers were the ones who had more courage than the people on who bombed people from thousands of feet or something like that. The point I think he was trying to make was, I think he was fighting because of free speech issues. So
Yeah.
let me just ask you that in a place like Pakistan, and to be honest with you, most of the Muslim majority countries where freedom of speech is extremely limited, isn't that something to do with the fact that our cultures are not open to discussion to begin with? I mean, you can't discuss many things in Pakistan openly, right? So how would you compare that to the things that are happening in the West, where people are saying, look, don't hurt another person, understand their sensitivity? We're not even remotely close to that in Pakistan. So how is that a problem in Pakistan or related countries?
Well, basically in Pakistan, the movement of individualism has never been there. So, firstly, if you're a thinker or a journalist or a writer, the first thing you need to do is to assimilate with the societal thinking. Because the moment when you start challenging all these structures, which could be family structures or the establishment or the clergy or the state or the government, whatever it may be, the problem is in the Pakistani society, somebody who is trying to dissent or trying to kind of counter the opinions of the prevalent mentality of the society is always looked down upon. So this is not a culture where somebody who's dissenting is respected. But in the West, it wasn't the same. Identity politics has changed that to a great degree, because I see what's happening in their campuses now, that people are thrown out for just arranging a lecture of somebody like Jordan Peterson, maybe, or people are thrown out for saying something which could have been benign 30, 40 years ago. So obviously there is this issue of free speech, but in Pakistan it's the other way around, because here you have to spare the structure basically. You can't just come out as somebody who's a harsh critic of the entire political or the social phenomena in the country, because then they will endanger your life. So in Pakistan,
Yes.
yeah,
Yes,
the
and
other
there
question.
are courageous people like yourself, and obviously a lot, and I know you probably know a lot more in your group of people, especially new generation. You have Amar Ali Jan, Jabran Nasser. You have a bunch of other people who speak out on a lot of issues. But do you really think that that's how it always was in Pakistan? Because it has been a change that Pakistan went through as well. It's not like it was easy, but it wasn't definitely not as bad as it is now regarding free speech, or at least any speech. You can't say anything. And do you think that's related to the Islamization of Pakistan, the Talibanization of our culture, where everything is connected? You talk a lot about critical thinking, right? You talk a lot about that because it makes sense. That's the foundation of everything. Don't you think that's connected to religiosity, where if you can't speak about one thing, you can't speak about other things?
Well, obviously, this is a kind of a self-censorship that goes through it, because the moment when you try to challenge these people, they will use religion as a binding force of their own parties, and as they will pit that against you. So when you are criticizing somebody from their ranks, they will say that it's an attack on the entire dogma. So the problem is the shield that they have been using has been painted with the sticker of religion, and that's why it's very difficult to go about things. But the change that you are talking about has been provided by the internet, basically, because in the past it was not there. So you couldn't just write anything that you wanted to, because there were no platforms. If you were writing a book, the state will regulate that. If you are a TV anchor, the state will regulate that. But the problem that the Pakistani state is facing currently is that it is unable to regulate social media. That's why there is this outrage by the far right movements in Pakistan that we have to stop this discourse on social media, because it is very very defaming, and it's absurd. So they are trying their best to silence people, basically. But I think we should pay respect to everyone who's still trying to assert themselves in this kind of an environment. But really the fuel of this entire change is basically internet, same as the printing press did in the Europe. when
Good purpose, yes. Yes.
trying to change things. Yeah. So
Yeah,
internet is.
don't you think, can I ask you, Muzammil, if you think that um, the genie's out of the bottle? I mean, even if they try to change it, or they do cut internet sometimes, right? In many societies, right? They try to do that, but I don't think at a mass scale they can do that anymore, right? They don't have a, what do you call that? A button. There's a word for it, I think. A kill button or something like that, where all internet goes down. Do you think they'll eventually that's what's going to move towards?
Well, I think countries like Afghanistan or North Korea or Iran can afford that, but Pakistan cannot. The reason is that we are too allied to the Western institutions. If we need an aid from IMF or we need to go to the World Bank every single year, we can't just wipe out human rights and then demand a monetary aid from them. They'll sanction us. So our dependence on the Western world is kind of working as a bliss for many people in Pakistan as well, because they know that they can't really wipe out the entire discourse. But the domination of China is a concern, because obviously the Chinese mentality is very evident. They won't allow you to have your own voice, and a Chinese citizen can't even have a WhatsApp in his phone. So the reason is, if China dominates in this part of the world, the free speech is going down. So I'm not saying that West is a heaven where you can say everything, where there is no Julian Assange or where there is no Edward Snowden. Yes, there are problems there. But the thing is, if you compare that with the Chinese Communist Party, I think they appear as angels to me.
Oh yeah, in relatively, of course. But I think, I guess the point I was trying to counter with was that is the freedom that's progressed with. Okay, well, they're trying to hit the balance where they're saying, okay, well, there's sensitivity is also part of free speech. And again, there are no laws about it, right? So people are kind of, it's a like you call it, self-censoring. A lot of people in the West are saying we have to self-censor. Speaking of Bill Maher being a very prominent critic of Islam, right? And all Muslims. He has taken a very reductive look at Muslims, and basically have sided with Sam Harris and maybe some others. But regardless, Bill Maher is in what you hate, infotainment, I believe. I know you don't like the word. Can you expand on that a little bit? You believe there is no such thing, or there should be no such thing, right? Infotainment.
And well, obviously, because it's an absurd mixation of the two phenomena, because it's kind of a new phenomena that has emerged out of this televised entertainment kind of a platform. So my problem with these platforms is that obviously I'm also a broadcast journalist, but I've always understood the fact that it is not a serious medium. The reason is that when you appear on a video format, or when you appear on TV, so your presence and your appearance kind of, it takes the front seat and language goes to the back seat. And that is why it's not a consistent manner of communication, because if you are hosting a show and you have 35 minutes, just like I host my show, I have 35 minutes, 4 people on the panel, 8 minutes per person. What am I going to say in that setting? Nothing. The reason that I kind of abhor these new emerging technologies, though I have to adopt them as well, is that they don't provide a serious, consistent manner and a chain of communication for the reader as it used to be in the books. So that's why in this kind of a platform, entertainment will go for the longer run than the information age, because that's where it sells more. Yeah.
But Muzammil, also, I mean, you're aware of the Daily Show, obviously. The Daily Show became, with Jon Stewart, it became a huge thing in the U.S. elections and the U.S. politics. It was completely pure infotainment. A lot of it was said with and again, I see your point. The only thing is, then people would say, aren't you expecting a lot from everybody else? Like, everybody doesn't have the time to delve into things deeply or more seriously, because people have to go to jobs and raise families and try to put food on their table. So the word elitism would get thrown around, and it has been thrown around in Pakistan a lot, because we always had a core group of people who would always have a different perspective. But do you get blamed? Do you get accused of that?
No, I've never been accused of that. The reason is that
I'm not accusing you, but I'm surprised you haven't been, because that's something every time people talk about, hey, these people, they should be given something else. People say that's an elitist perspective. How come you don't see it that way?
Well, they kind of see me as somebody who's a part of their own struggles as well, because I've I rose from the lower middle class background basically, and I was saying things that were supportive to the communities who were sitting on the fringes in Pakistan, just like the Baloch people or the Pashtun people or the Gilgitis. So when somebody is raising the voice for them, they won't see him as somebody who's elitist.
I
So
don't mean to suggest that those, people that you're raising the voice for. I'm talking about your people in media, other people who are of your, other journalists. When they hear you say something like, well, this whole medium doesn't give enough for me to communicate to people, they'll be like, well, that's
well,
how it is, and everybody doesn't need what you're trying to sell them.
I get that, but
Yeah.
I don't really agree with the fact that if you're too occupied with making ends meet, then you can't think. Because I think that the difficulty is the right kind of a setting to think basically, and to think deeply as well. Because when you are posed with difficulties, then you find answers to the questions that life is asking to you. So elitism basically is a bubble in which you live a very comfortable and a very hedonistic life. And in that kind of a life, you don't have to find those answers that a person who is suffering will get to find. So suffering is basically, the recipe of the entire human greatness in the past. So anybody who's, trying his best to make ends meet, it could still go and look out for the truth there. It's all about the intellectual seriousness. I have seen people who have been occupied their entire day, and they still get to find some very good stuff to talk about. They have substance in their communication. And then there are people who are totally free and who have nothing else to do, but they still keep consuming these seasons on Netflix. So basically, it's the intellect.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah, no,
It's the
I understand what you're saying. I'm not saying everybody's one or another, but I take your point. Okay, well, let me bring this to the other side then. Why has there not been an uprising in Pakistan? Most people are poor. Majority of the people are suffering due to corruption and due to waste. How come you think it's missing? How come the Kisans and the daily workers have not taken up arms?
Well, basically, the first thing is the fault line, because the Pakistani society is so badly disintegrated that there is no feeling of assimilation. They have never became a nation. The reason is that the entire project of the country's incarnation on the map of the world was artificial. They were forcefully fed with the idea that they are all Pakistanis, and they were never kind of given a free hand to assimilate with each other, to connect with each other. The Baloch was told that you are a Pakistani and forget your identity. The Pashtun was told that you have to fight the war in Afghanistan, and even after that, we will demonize you and we will carry out these operations in your areas. Only in the upper Punjab area you could feel a Pakistani sense prevailing. So that's why the number one reason is the disintegration, because they didn't become one nation, something which the French did before the French Revolution, because they felt that they are a nation oppressed by the clergy and the nobility. And the Americans also felt as one nation, but we couldn't. Number two is kind of the interpretation of the Saudi Salafi Islam that Pakistanis follow. And in that particular mindset, they are always kind of inclined to thinking that all these oppressors, all these people who are exploiting us, God will get an answer from them in the hereafter. We don't have to. So the number one thing is, if you have let all this thing on God to be done in your favor, then you can't just get up and do it for yourself. So this dogmatic mindset that everything will be settled in the transcendental world, and we don't have to do a serious effort in this one, it'll make you docile, it'll make you appeasing all this atrocity that
Opium of the masses, basically analysis.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So this interpretation is very problematic, which has been done since like 3-4 decades. So that's another reason that why these lower classes, though they are badly suffering, though their children are dying by malnutrition, though there are no health facilities, when you take a mic and you go to them and you ask them, how do you feel? They will say, all is good because God is on our side.
Yeah. I asked Dr. Hoodboy this, and I'm going to ask you this as well. What is the morality of a state that refuses to feed its people, but continues to feed nuclear facilities and nuclear weapons? What is the morality of that society?
Well, basically, it's a garrison state, and basically, it was made for the establishment. Initially, it was ruled by people who were from the 1%, and there were 20, 30 families who treated Pakistan as an amnesty scheme, that whoever have a lot of lands and whoever is afraid of India's land reform, you can come on our side and we can, just hand you a good kind of a package in which you can survive as well. So this was a country for the Vaderas, for the nobility, for those princes sitting in the princely states in Pakistan, and for the people who were, saints in the South Punjab region, with a lot of followers just because they had that religious devotion to them. So those were the people who made this country, and they had no connection to the masses. Basically, there was no mass appeal, and this entire vacuum was filled by the establishment subsequently. And then it became a country for the establishment. Ayub Khan is basically the real founder of Pakistan, because he is the architect of the modern Pakistan that we live in. So that's why this country was kind of established to serve the interest of an institution, not of the people. And that is why the interest of the institution was the nuclear kind of armaments and not the well-being of the people. So still, there is this confrontational mindset with India. Recently, Bilawal Bhutto went there, and after he got back and Jai Shankar said some harsh things about him, the entire country is flared up and they are like jingoistic right now, and they want to just behead people. They are totally going bonkers because somebody has said something about our honor. So these people live in that honor frame of mind. They don't value that the fact that you are economically bankrupt, you have to lend from IMF, you can't even survive for a single month if China doesn't give you anything. But your ego is hitting the skies, and you are trying to tell the fourth largest economy in the world that you have to respect us, otherwise we are going to annex you. So this is that delusional mentality that has prevailed in Pakistan, and this is the lack of rationalism and critical thinking that we try to propagate in the society.
Yeah, and also, actually, I do want to talk to you about the propagation of it, but I know I saw your tweet yesterday regarding if you can beat them, join them. I think that was kind of a tongue-in-cheek sort of thing. Obviously, we can't join them, but at the same time, the self-esteem issue is really there, because I think, in all honesty, that Bilawal handled himself pretty well over there, and he needed to go, and he actually got more out of it than they would have liked him to get, because he was able to meet other people.
Exactly.
But yeah.
But
so is this a lot of self-esteem that we get hurt so badly? No, what did we expect India was going to do? Like, what did they think they were going to do to Bilawal? Like, put a red carpet for him specially, or what?
Well, basically, the political spin doctors in Pakistan, they have a huge following on Twitter as well, on YouTube as well. And those are the people who support Pakistan Tehreek-e-Insaf. And right now, they want to burn the entire country down if it elect Khan back. So they are not thinking about the national interest at this stage. They will malign every single person who is standing against Imran Khan, and Bilawal is in the other camp. So I criticized Bilawal harshly when he said Modi is a butcher of Gujarat, because I thought that, buddy, you have to seek out your interest first, and then you have to speak the truth. So diplomacy is not the art of truthfulness. It's
also,
the art of.
I was watching on Geo Muzammil, not to cut you off, but I was going to remind you, you probably know this already, how Bilawal used to call Nawaz Sharif Modi ka yaar and all that stuff. I mean, they've all done that to each other. They've all maligned each other in the name of jingoism and anti-India, right? I mean, they've made.
That's right, but the problem with this narrative that you have to keep the honor intact when you're talking to a foreign country, I think it's pretty delusional, because in the international sphere, only Machiavellianism works. And that is the art of manipulation. If you're seeking out your interest and maximizing the interest of your people, you don't have to care for the honor and all that. Look at the Japanese. The Americans nuked them, but they're still cooperating with them. They haven't kind of created that trade embargo with America. Look at India and China. They are fighting a war, practical war in Ladakh right now. They are still talking to each other. The problem,
and they trade with each other. They trade. Dr. Hoodboy made the point that India and China still trade with each other as well.
On a massive scale. So there is no, because they know that our interest comes first, and then comes the honor that we kind of value too much. So these kind of honor shaming culture in Pakistan, it's everywhere. And that is the reason that we have failed at the international front, because we have taken and picked fights that we shouldn't have done. Yeah.
Because religion also, that's the problem too. When you move toward religiosity, you move towards extreme tribalism. You got a superiority complex. But again, that's That's at least how I see it. But let me ask you something. You're speaking of honor. I was going to ask you, do you think when Imran Khan, it was 390, right? That was taken off in Kashmir, I believe. Yeah. So at that point, Imran Khan said in the parliament, which he hardly went to, and said, "What do you want us to do? Start a war?" Right? I mean, that was the point when they had to make a decision, and they made their decision.
Yeah.
The establishment, the garrison state, everybody made their decision. So it just seems like they had no future plan after that. They didn't think that, okay, we would have to deal with this after that. Like, what is their state of frame of mind now?
They had to accept that because they know that they can't initiate something they have done 4 times in the past to complete futility. I mean, they have initiated 4 wars with India, and they weren't able to capture a single square mile. So what does that tell you? Stop this jingoism. In 1999, when Bajpayee was coming to Pakistan, he went to Minar-e-Pakistan with Nawaz Sharif, and that was a massive gesture in the Indo-Pak relations, because that was the acknowledgement of the state of Pakistan, that the Indian PM was standing at the national monument of the country, and they were talking about resolving the Kashmir issue. And then there is Pervez Musharraf, who kind of crosses the border and does Kargil. So the reason that this dialogue has always been sabotaged is because it goes against the establishment's interest, and that's why we saw that. Anybody who tried to make a serious efforts of maintaining good relationship with India was kind of slapped with the term Modi ka yaar or Ghattar or Kashmir ka sauda karne wala. These terms were basically used for people who wanted to fix things in Pakistan and India.
But mostly civilian politicians. When I remember, I'm old enough to remember Muzammil in 80s when there was we were at a flashpoint. Ziaul Haq flew to India to attend a cricket match. Nobody said a word then. I mean, maybe a few, but nobody could say anything, frankly. And when Musharraf did some gestures, right?
Yeah, Musharraf did the same,
right? Muzammil, go ahead. Sorry, go ahead. About Musharraf, he did the same.
Yeah, he went to Agra for the conference, and
so nobody said a word to him at that point, right? Because he was of the military.
Yeah. Well, they couldn't say anything because the Pakistani kind of the establishment, actually it only demonizes the civilian politicians. Yeah. Why would they demonize their own predecessor? I mean, the last government tried to try the last from the last, basically. Yeah. They kind of wanted to try Musharraf in courts, and a judge also sentenced him to death by hanging, but nothing could take place, nothing could materialize. The reason is that you can't kind of make an example, or you can't kind of set a precedent that if an ex-chief is trying to is kind of getting convicted, then that sets a precedent that you have to be accountable to the people of Pakistan, which they are not. So the reason is any civilian politician who tried to fix things within this region between Pakistan and India, they were called a traitor, and that's the reason why nobody tries to go down that rabbit hole anymore, because they know that they will lose a lot of political capital as well, and they will be thrown out as well.
Muzammil, are you writing a book or thinking about writing a book at any point?
Well, I have a kind of a couple of ideas in my mind, but haven't really gotten the time to start writing. But I think this is the year when I'll start writing a book, basically, because I have had a great digital footprint, and now is the time to convert that to the textual format, maybe, because I think book is a legacy of a person that kind of outdates him as well. So that is something I wish to do, and to do it very soon is a wish. Yeah, I'll start working on it soon, I think.
I know Bilal Zahood, who started Folio Press in Lahore. I don't know if you know him personally, but he's trying to bring back, at least local publishing and all that quite a bit. Is the book culture pretty slow and still very limited even in the big cities in Pakistan?
Well, basically, it's about where do you belong from. If somebody who's living in a big city, who's privileged enough, who has had a good job, and who is pampered by the family, so they are kind of students who do not strive a lot on campuses. They just go there to get a degree and get to run the family business. But I've seen this reading culture prevailing in the peripheries, especially in Balochistan and in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, the students there, be it a Baloch student or a Pashtun student, they are searching for answers more than somebody who's living in Lahore or Islamabad, because they have been kind of treated harshly in the last 30, 40 years. So that's why the condition that they survive in is very, very problematic, and that always makes you search for answers. So I've went to these universities for public speaking, and I've seen those students kind of getting a lot of interest in philosophy, in history, in politics. And every other day, I get to see a lot of messages from people who want me to recommend some good books to them. So that shows that there is some curiosity, some reading culture kind of getting redeemed in Pakistan. But in the big cities, I don't think it is happening in that scale.
And when we say reading culture at this point, obviously the availability to the new generation, which wasn't there when I was growing up in the 80s, was, I mean, you have YouTube. I mean, you have audiobooks, you have insane amount of information. I assume that all is, I mean, that's where they're seeking a lot of these things at this point, right? I mean, even people who can read can hear, obviously,
Exactly.
and they can go to YouTube and listen to lectures and listen to things they're interested in. Is that, do you think that that is happening at a wide scale?
It is, because the availability of this mass level information is unprecedented. It wasn't there, especially in a country like Pakistan, where you will find all the good books banned. So where are you going to access them? Nowhere. So internet has provided them kind of a doorway through which they
Yes.
can enter this massive space. And there are people who kind of watch these podcasts. This podcast culture is also kind of taking place in Pakistan. And it is totally fine to people to watch a podcast which is like 2 or 2.5 hours long, because now they're kind of striving to maximize their attention spans, and they treat that as a book, because if they can't read, they can watch. So that's easy for them.
Definitely. Dr. Hoodboy said one thing interesting that kind of surprised me, and I wanted to get your take on it. I asked him about literacy. He said literacy was not as important as, at least that's what he believed at this point. This was just a month ago or so. He thought that skilled labor and training for that is more important. Well, what's your take on that overall? Literacy versus that, or however, yeah.
I think basic literacy has to be there, even if you have a skill and you can't just write your own name down. So it would be a problem in pursuing whatever career you are trying to pursue. But the problem is this institutional literacy in Pakistan. It doesn't help a person to think out of the box. I mean, I've seen PhDs in Pakistan who are completely hallucinated by this dogmatic delusions that they are stuck in. So the generation that grew up in Zia's time, I have seen them taking degrees from the top universities and still not being able to think by themselves or to write anything or to be creative, because this institutional education in Pakistan is a complete hoax. You know, it's a trap, and you can become a graduate, but you still be mostly illiterate. So the reason is we have to reform the educational structure of the country. We have to stop lying about our history. We have to stop teaching all the subjects with a dogmatic and a religious frame of mind, because science has nothing to do with dogma. So we have to separate and secularize the education. And that's where the problem lies, because if you are literate and you have a degree from a university, but you're still an extremist radical who wants to behead anybody who disagrees with you, so I will consider that person as an illiterate person. So the reason is there is no educational reform in the country. The last government brought in single national curriculum, which was further intensifying the radical literature in the Pakistani schools and secular institutions. So a reform is needed. And then there are like 24 million out of school children in Pakistan at this stage, the second worst in the world. So we have to get them back into the schools. So nobody talks about these issues, because these are issues which obviously kind of seeks a lot of effort from their parties. But this is the main issue. I don't think that literacy is not required. I think educational reform is required here.
Because you can't even provide basic critical thinking skills or anything without fundamentals, right? I mean, there has to be a foundation, I suppose. And maybe that's not what Dr. Hoodboy meant, like no literacy, but I was more talking about a literacy campaign, things like that. I think that's where he was coming from. What should, money be spent on? You mentioned, people are ready to obviously behead each other, kill each other. How much of that is connected to lawlessness? Look, in the States, just 15 minutes from my house, somebody killed 9 people today in a mall. Okay. It's horrendous. Yeah. In Allen, Texas. But we know that the guy got killed by the police. But if he hadn't been killed, he would have been caught, he would have been tried, he would have gotten his due process, but there would have been consequences.
Yeah.
Isn't that what's fundamentally missing from Pakistan? Anyone can do anything and get away with it, especially the rich, obviously. But
Yeah.
isn't lawlessness a big thing that no one has touched? Nawaz Sharif, military, of course, never. But they just use their Eagle squads and whatever they have now, Rangers. But isn't that a big thing, Muzammil, just to have a basic standard of living and liberty, interest? Aren't they? Let me ask you, don't you think that people say, oh, I'll do this to that, I'll do that if you say something, because they know there'll be no consequences?
Well, obviously, I mean, Pakistan does not fall under the definition of a state, basically. If you seek out the definition given by Max Weber, state is an entity which has the monopoly on legitimate use of violence. So when that monopoly gets disintegrated and disseminated among different groups in a society, the state does not exist practically. So by that definition, Pakistan is not a state. It is an amalgamation of hooligans who have their own political and street powers, and they just exercise violence anywhere, and they balance that out with the state. I mean, just yesterday, a person in Mardan got lynched because he said something in a political rally which didn't seem fit for the people who were listening him. So nobody kind of thought at that particular instant that if I lynch this guy, I will have to serve behind bars my entire life, because they know there won't be any consequences. So I agree with you. The problem is that the monopoly of the state has been badly challenged, and the clergy and the far right groups have been weaponized in the Afghan war, and now they have transcended the power of the state as well. Even the army chief is afraid of them, and even he has to get the affirmation of some clerics about his religious faith before getting selected as an army chief. So that tells you the situation, that even the state is petrified by these groups who could kill anyone at any point on any pretext. So the reason is the centralization of the legitimate use of violence is not there. And there are many big groups. Some are politicians, some are like Vaderas, and some of them are madrasa teachers and all that. They have their own monopolies. They exercise violence freely, and they negotiate with the state. So Anatol Lieven calls Pakistan a negotiated state for the same reason, because he says that there are several groups who negotiate with each other, and if negotiations fail, then the constitutional law applies to them. Otherwise, it doesn't. So if you have enough power, you can kind of bypass the law easily. If you do not have power, then you become a citizen who could be treated under the law. So obviously, by the definition of Weber, Pakistan is not a state.
So it's not even a matter of failed state, it's a matter of not a state.
Lessness.
Yeah, we're no longer there where we can become a failed state. It's actually okay. That's interesting. Muzammil, let me ask you something. You mentioned a lot of people who go to get degrees and all that. Why are there so many doctors in journalism? Why is doctor this, doctor that? I really need to know.
Well, basically, I think they love cameras and attention. Maybe I've never asked them.
Are they practicing, or they just like to be? They got those degrees and now they're like doctor this, but I'm in journalism.
I at least know one, Dr. Syed Masood, who was a surgeon in Jinnah Hospital, Lahore. So I think he has stopped practicing now. But obviously, journalism, unfortunately, in Pakistan is just a matter of getting a camera right now, because you don't have to be, technocratic in your approach, and you don't have to have a degree. If you speak well and you kind of you can kind of compel people to think emotionally, and you can just kind of create a circus on TV, then you're good enough to go. So these mainstream media channels have no scrutiny as far entertainment as well. So as far as the scrutiny is concerned of educational backgrounds and all that, it doesn't exist in the mainstream media. And I think something which works almost 10 out of 10 times is if you have a good connection with the political people or with the people in the establishment, so you can get the best job in journalism. So that's why we see these doctors and non-professionals coming into the field. And
is there a good journalism school in Lums or anywhere? I assume there's journalism schools now.
I think the biggest one is in Punjab University, the School of Communication, and almost 80% of the graduates who come to media are graduated from there. And I don't know what they are teaching, but all of them seem pretty monotonous mentally, because even they have the same kind of that conventional approach of investigation in journalism. And most of them are polemicists, because they believe in those emotional sermons on TV, and they don't like being reasoned with. And basically, some of them, in fact, 80% of the news anchors who read news on TV had a debating background. So they have been into those declamation competitions where they will quote Iqbal and they will just, break the mic and throw away things. So
Drop the mic.
that zeal and that zest in their speech. So they just stress upon the clarity of their speech and the language of the speech that they are using, but the thought behind this is totally not there. So as Chomsky has said, that language was an instrument of thought, not of communication. But to these Pakistani journalists, language is an instrument of only communication. You don't have to think.
Why did you join BOL?
Well, basically, I was very shocked and astounded when they called me. And I asked them the same question, that are you in your right mind that you're calling a person like me? I mean, are you sure? So what they said is they had a panel show, and the opinion, which is too kind of pro PTI or too pro Imran Khan, it has to be balanced. So they wanted somebody who's critical of the opinions given by all these politicians. So what I got in a guarantee was that I'll speak my mind, I won't bend my words, and I will not get dictation from your organization. If that's good to go, I am ready to come. So a journalist basically needs a big platform to be heard, and BOL is one of the top 3 in the country right now in terms of rating. No matter what their policies have been, I totally disagree with them. I still do that. But the thing is, I am on a big platform right now, and there are more people who can listen to me right now. So I saw it as an opportunity to go in that space and kind of assert myself without changing it. So that's why I stressed upon the idea that I won't change my mentality and ideology. And as long as I'm not doing that, any platform is welcomed.
And they gave you that in your contract, you have that space where they're not going to tell you to say particular, obviously you won't.
Exactly. Okay. I won't do a compromise at all, because that will destroy my entire body of work.
Right, and the credibility, obviously, because and again, I think once you join, just to let you know, the people who watch you here, at least the people I know, were surprised. But at the same time, I've been watching you on there a bit, and some others have, and yes, you bite your tongue a lot. I can tell you bite your. But it's good. By the way, my favorite show on BOL, whenever I'm feeling down, is Ab Aise Nahi Chalega. Whenever I'm sad, it's a tough day, I watch a little bit of that. I'm like happy.
And you want to have a good laugh, so you
it's wonderful. It's wonderful. And she's also a doctor, by the way. I assume that if I get sick, she'll be there. But listen, I cannot thank you enough. We can probably talk for a long time. I know you made time for us today. I cannot appreciate it more. It gives a lot of people on the other side. I know it's hard for you guys to believe sometimes, but everybody in the diaspora is not exactly very dogmatic and all that. I mean, a lot of us grew up in the 80s, and like my father grew up in the 60s, who lives here. We all watch with much enthusiasm young people like yourself and other people who are doing the work that needs to be done. So, speaking the truth, that's what I mean. Speaking the truth to power.
No, it was a very, very intriguing conversation, and I totally appreciate your approach in asking these questions. And I wish you the best and your audience the best of this platform. Thank you.
Thank you, Muzammil. Thank you. Have a wonderful rest of the day, and hopefully we'll meet again down the road. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you.